You've already broken a promise to yourself today. Maybe it was small. You said you'd wake up early, and you didn't. You said you'd skip the thing that wastes your time, and you didn't. You said you'd be patient, be disciplined, be the person you keep telling yourself you're becoming. And then life happened, and the version of you that made those promises, the one who felt so clear, so determined, so ready, somehow wasn't there when it mattered. That's not weakness. That's not laziness. That's not a character flaw. That is the oldest war in human history, and it has a name. And more importantly, it has a solution. One that was discovered not by a modern psychologist, not by a self-help guru, not by a productivity influencer with a morning routine. It was discovered over 2,000 years ago by a man who nearly destroyed himself before he found it. And once you understand it, truly understand it, not just hear it, you will never see self-control the same way again. Let's talk about what's actually happening when you lose control of yourself. Because here's what the self-help industry keeps getting wrong. They treat self-control like a muscle. Use it more, it gets stronger. Let it rest, it recovers. And the solution, they tell you, is always more discipline, more willpower, more structure, more systems, more accountability, more punishment when you fail. And so you try harder. You download another app. You make another resolution. You feel the surge of motivation, that electric feeling of this time it's different. And for a few days, maybe a week, maybe even a month, it works. And then it doesn't. And the failure doesn't just reset you to zero, it leaves you worse than before. Because now you have evidence, real, lived, personal evidence, that you can't be trusted, that your word to yourself means nothing, that the gap between who you want to be and who you actually are might just be permanent. And that evidence compounds. Every broken promise adds weight. Every relapse reinforces the story, and eventually, some people stop making promises to themselves at all, because it hurts less not to try than to try and fail again. Sound familiar? Here's what no one is telling you. The willpower model of self-control is not just incomplete, it is fundamentally wrong. And the ancient philosophers knew it. They knew it because they lived it, because they watched brilliant, educated, morally serious people, people who knew exactly what was right, make catastrophically wrong choices, not out of ignorance, not out of stupidity, but because of something far more complicated and far more human. The Greeks had a word for it, akrasia. It means acting against your own better judgment. Doing the thing you know you shouldn't, not doing the thing you know you should. The gap between knowing and doing. And Aristotle, the greatest systematic thinker in human history, spent years trying to understand why it happens. Not to judge the people it happens to, but to find the root, the actual mechanism, the thing underneath the thing. Because until you understand why you lose control, every solution is just a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. So what did he find? Stay with me, because what comes next will completely reframe how you understand yourself. Picture a young man in ancient Athens, gifted beyond almost anyone of his generation, handsome, witty, born into exactly the right social circle, educated by the greatest minds of the ancient world, including Socrates himself. His name was Alcibiades, and he was, by every external measure, destined for greatness. The kind of person who walks into a room and changes its temperature, who makes everyone want to be near him, to be chosen by him, to be seen by him. But Alcibiades had a problem. He could not control himself. Not for lack of intelligence, he was brilliant. Not for lack of values, he genuinely wanted to be good. He sat at the feet of Socrates and was moved by philosophy in ways that most people never experience. He understood intellectually what virtue looked like. He could describe the ideal life with more precision and beauty than almost anyone. And then he would go out and live the opposite. He betrayed Athens, the city he loved, to its greatest enemy. Not once, multiple times. He switched sides so many times that he eventually ran out of sides to switch to. He pursued pleasure, power, and status with an appetite that swallowed everything in its path. Relationships, loyalty, principle, country. And the tragedy, the part that makes this story different from just another tale of corruption, is that he knew. He sat with Socrates after his worst decisions and wept. Not performed grief, real, devastating grief. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he did it anyway. Plato immortalized him. Aristotle studied him. And philosophers have argued about him for 2,000 years because he represents something terrifying and deeply human. The person who knows exactly what is right and chooses wrong anyway. Now here's where it gets personal. Because Alcibiades isn't just an ancient historical figure. Alcibiades is every person who has ever set an alarm they ignored. Every person who has ever watched themselves eat the thing, say the thing, spend the thing, avoid the thing, while simultaneously knowing better. Alcibiades is the part of you that loses to itself. And Aristotle, watching this unfold, asked the question that would become the foundation of one of the most sophisticated frameworks for human behavior ever constructed. Why does knowing not produce doing, and what does? Aristotle's answer was not what anyone expected, and it is still, 2,000 years later, more psychologically accurate than most modern frameworks. He said, "The problem is not knowledge, and it's not willpower. The problem is desire. More specifically, the relationship between your rational mind and your desiring mind, and what happens when they come into conflict." Here's how he mapped it. Inside every human being, there are two forces constantly negotiating. The first is logos, reason. The part of you that can calculate, plan, delay gratification, understand consequences, set goals, and articulate values. This is the part that makes the promise, that sets the alarm, that knows the right thing to do. Second is orexis, desire, appetite, impulse. The part of you that wants, right now, immediately, without waiting. That reaches for comfort when there's discomfort available. That's because pleasure feels good and pain feels bad. That is ancient, fast, and extraordinarily powerful. And here is the critical insight that Aristotle arrived at. The one that changes everything. Reason alone cannot motivate action. Desire always can. Read that again. Because most people assume the opposite. We assume that if we just think clearly enough about why discipline matters, we'll be disciplined. If we just understand the consequences of our choices, we'll make better ones. If we just know enough, we'll do enough. But that's not how human beings work. That's never been how human beings work. Your rational mind can construct a perfect argument for going to the gym. It can list the health benefits, the longevity data, the mood improvement research, the social confidence gains, every single logical reason why you should go right now. And then your body says, "I'm tired," and you don't go, because desire doesn't respond to arguments. Desire responds to desire. And this is where Aristotle's framework gets genuinely brilliant, because instead of telling you to suppress your desires, to override them with willpower, to white-knuckle your way through life, he tells you something completely different. He tells you to change what you want, not what you know, what you want. And here is the mechanism he identified for how that actually happens. The doctrine of the mean and the role of habit. Aristotle said that virtue, which includes self-control, is not a state. It is not something you have or don't have. It is a disposition, a trained tendency to feel the right things at the right times toward the right objects in the right degree. Think about what that means. The self-controlled person doesn't resist the temptation through gritted teeth. They don't feel the pull as strongly in the first place, not because they suppressed it, but because their desires have been trained, through repeated action, to align with their values. And the instrument of that training is habit. Aristotle wrote, "We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts, not by deciding to be those things, not by understanding those things, by doing them repeatedly, consistently, long enough for the doing to reshape the wanting." This is the ancient secret to self-control. It is not an act of will. It is an act of architecture. You build through deliberate, repeated action, a self that wants what is good for it, a self whose desires and values have been brought into alignment, not through force, but through practice. But Aristotle didn't stop there, because he knew that habit alone wasn't sufficient. He identified something else, something that sits between desire and action that most people miss entirely. He called it phronesis, practical wisdom, and it is the missing piece that almost every self-help system forgets to include. Phronesis is not theoretical knowledge. It's not knowing that something is good in the abstract. It is the real-time, Context-sensitive ability to perceive what the right action is in this specific moment, and to have the emotional attunement to be moved by that perception. The person with phronesis doesn't just know the principle, they can feel the right action pulling them forward, the way a musician does. He just know music theory, but here's what the piece needs. The way a master chef doesn't just know recipes, but tastes what's missing. Practical wisdom is self-control made intuitive, and it only develops through the same mechanism as virtue: practice, reflection, and time. So where does this leave you? With a framework, a real one, not a list of tips, a complete understanding of what self-control actually is and how it actually develops. It is not willpower. It is not discipline as punishment. It is the slow, patient, deliberate reshaping of your desires through action, until the person who breaks promises to themselves has become someone else entirely. Now let's talk about how to do it. Lesson 1. Stop fighting your desires. Redirect them. This is the foundational shift. Every time you try to suppress a desire through willpower, you're entering a war you will eventually lose. The desire is older than your rational mind. It is faster, more automatic, and backed by neurological systems that evolved over millions of years. You cannot outmuscle it indefinitely, but you can redirect it. The next time you feel the pull towards something that works against you, don't try to destroy the desire. Ask, what does this desire actually want? Underneath the urge to scroll is often the desire for rest, for stimulation, for connection. Underneath the urge to eat carelessly is often the desire for comfort, for reward, for relief. Find the real desire underneath the surface behavior and find a better path to the same destination. This is not rationalization. This is Aristotelian precision. You're not eliminating the desire. You're training it to move in a more useful direction. Lesson 2. Make your environment do the work your willpower can't. Aristotle was deeply concerned with context, because he understood that virtue doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates in environments that either support or undermine it. Your self-control is not a fixed quantity you carry around. It fluctuates wildly based on what surrounds you. What's visible, what's available, what's easy, what's defaulted. If the phone is in the bedroom, you will look at it when you wake up. Not because you decided to, because it's there. If the food is in the cupboard, you will eat it at 11 p.m. Not because you planned to, because it's accessible. If the path to the gym requires 12 steps and the path to the couch requires 2, you know where you'll end up. The Stoics called this premeditatio, premeditation, thinking ahead about the conditions that will make virtue easy and vice difficult. Designing your life so that the right choice is also the default choice. Remove friction from what you want to do. Add friction to what you don't, and watch your self-control dramatically improve. Not because you got stronger, but because the battlefield changed. Lesson 3. Build identity before you build behavior. Here is one of the most important things Aristotle understood, and that modern behavioral science has only recently confirmed. Behavior follows identity, not the other way around. When you try to change a behavior without changing who you believe you are, you're swimming upstream. You're fighting the deepest programming you have, the story of who you are and what people like you do. But when you change the identity first, when you begin to genuinely see yourself as someone who moves their body, who thinks before they speak, who chooses long-term over short-term, the behavior begins to follow with far less resistance. This is why Aristotle was so insistent on virtue as a disposition rather than an action. He wasn't interested in occasional good behavior. He was interested in the formation of a certain kind of person, someone for whom virtue is the natural expression of who they are. So the question isn't, how do I get myself to do this? The question is, who is the person I am becoming, and what does that person naturally do? Start there. Let the behavior follow. Lesson 4. Use failure as data, not as verdict. This is where most people's self-improvement projects go wrong. The moment they fail, and they will fail, everyone fails. They treat the failure as proof of something permanent, as evidence that they are fundamentally broken, as confirmation of the story they were afraid was true all along. Aristotle was ruthlessly pragmatic about this. He didn't moralize failure. He analyzed it. When acrasia wins, when you act against your better judgment, the right question is not what is wrong with me. It is, what were the conditions that made this outcome likely? What was I feeling? What was present in my environment? What was absent? What story was running in my mind? Failure, examined carefully, is the most precise map you have of the territory where your self-control breaks down. And a map is not a verdict. A map is information. Information you can use to redesign the conditions, redirect the desire, or strengthen the habit in the specific place it cracked. This is phronesis in action, practical wisdom applied to your own psychology. Not judgment, inquiry. Lesson 5. Practice the pause and make it sacred. Between stimulus and response there is a space. Viktor Frankl wrote about it. The Stoics built their entire practice around it. Aristotle called it the moment where reason has its only real chance to intervene. In that space, that half second between the impulse and the action, everything is possible. The practice is simple, brutally simple, almost insultingly simple. When you feel the impulse, stop, breathe, count to 10 if you have to. Make the pause longer than feels comfortable. In that pause, ask one question. Is this the action of the person I am becoming? Not should I do this? Not is this good or bad? Not a moral interrogation that activates resistance and guilt. Just, is this who I'm becoming? Because if you've done the identity work, if you've begun to build a genuine sense of who you're becoming, that question has a pull to it. A gravitational pull toward the right action. Not because you're forcing it, but because the identity has started to take root. The pause is the practice. The pause is everything. Build it until it becomes automatic, until your first response to impulse is space rather than action. That space is where self-control lives. Lesson 6. Understand the role of emotion in virtue. This is the most misunderstood aspect of Aristotle's framework. Most people assume that self-control means not feeling things, that the disciplined person is the one who has suppressed or transcended their emotions, who operates purely from cool, rational calculation. Aristotle said the opposite. He said that the truly self-controlled person doesn't just do the right thing. They feel the right thing. They feel appropriate pleasure in virtue and appropriate discomfort in vice. Not because they've been conditioned to perform these feelings, but because their emotional life has been educated over time to align with their values. This matters practically because it tells you something important about where you are in the process. If doing the right thing still feels like deprivation, if choosing discipline still feels like punishment, you haven't finished the work yet. You're in the early stages where habit is still being formed and desire hasn't yet caught up with values. But keep going, because Aristotle promises, and behavioral science confirms, that with enough repetition, the relationship between your emotions and your values changes. The workout starts to feel good. The clean eating starts to taste better. The early morning starts to feel like privilege rather than sacrifice. Not immediately, not quickly, but inevitably, if you keep doing the work, the feelings are lagging indicators of the identity you're building. Trust the process long enough to let them catch up. Here is what becomes possible when you genuinely internalize this. You stop living in reaction and start living in intention, not because you've suppressed your impulses through sheer force, but because your impulses have slowly, patiently, been educated to serve you rather than control you. You stop measuring yourself by individual moments of success or failure, and start measuring yourself by the direction you're moving. One decision at a time, one pause at a time, one small act of alignment between who you are and who you want to be. You stop needing motivation because motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. What you build instead is something far more durable. A character, a self, a person who shows up not because they feel like it, but because that's simply what that person does. And perhaps most powerfully, you stop being at war with yourself. That war, the exhausting, demoralizing, daily war between the self that knows and the self that acts, begins to quiet. Not because the tension disappears, but because the gap closes, slowly, incrementally, through the unglamorous daily work of acting in alignment with your values until alignment becomes natural. Alcibiades had every gift except this one. He had intelligence, beauty, eloquence, opportunity, everything except the patient, deliberate work of educating his own desires. He remained brilliant and broken, extraordinary and ungoverned, and it cost him everything. The difference between the person who achieves what they're capable of and the person who spends their life wondering why they can't is rarely talent, rarely intelligence, rarely opportunity. It is almost always self-governance. The ability to act in alignment with your own best judgment, consistently over time, in the presence of every temptation and distraction and impulse the world throws at you. That ability is not a gift. It is not a personality type. It is not something you either have or don't. It is something you build, one decision at a time, starting now. The ancient secret to self-control is not a secret at all. It was written down 2,000 years ago by a man who studied human beings with more care and rigor than almost anyone before or since. It has been available to anyone willing to read, willing to sit with it, willing to apply it. The secret is this: you cannot think your way to self-control. You cannot feel your way there. You cannot will your way there. You can only practice your way there. Through the repeated, deliberate, imperfect, patient practice of acting like the person you want to become. Until one day, without ceremony, without announcement, without a single dramatic moment of transformation, you realize that you already are. Not perfect, never perfect. Aristotle never promised perfection. He promised something better: progress. The genuine, measurable, lived experience of becoming more aligned, more capable, more yourself over time. That is not a small thing. That is everything. The war you've been fighting against yourself, the war between knowing and doing, between wanting and having, between intention and action, does not end with a victory. It ends with something better. It ends when you stop being two people, the one who knows and the one who acts, and become one. That is the ancient secret, and it has been waiting for you. If this shifted something in how you see yourself, if there's a single idea from this video that's still running in your mind, don't let it stay theoretical. Pick one thing, just one. One practice, one pause, one small act of alignment with who you're becoming. Do it today, before this feeling fades. And subscribe to this channel, because this is what we do here. Every single week, we take the deepest, most rigorously tested wisdom in human history and translate it into something you can actually live. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, share this with one person who is tired of fighting themselves, and come back for the next one, because what we cover next goes even deeper into the philosophy of becoming someone the world cannot shake. You don't want to miss it.